Out of the darkness comes humanity's worst nightmares. Creatures with an appetite to kill and blood in their teeth. They war against truth, love, logic, and goodness. Although these creatures do not simply go bump in the night, nor are they torn from the pages of mythology. They are very real and are closer to home than you think. I'm talking about human beings, namely villains. In this series, we are going to look at some villains, specifically the villains brought to us in the biblical texts. Who were they? What did they do? Why did they do it? And what lessons can we learn? This is Villains of the Bible. Paranoia is the delusion that your enemies are organized. That was said by Arthur D. Lavette. Paranoia can make the human mind do extraordinary things. It can make you think that the boogeyman is real, that he knows your address, that every leaf that rustles in the park is trying to take your life. In paranoia, the human will fixate on what it's afraid to lose, and in many cases will force you to create a god out of that same thing. Paranoia is not a mindset of peace. It convinces you that everyone is out to get you. And for Herod the Great, he was probably afflicted by this same mindset, that everyone was out to get him, to take what was rightfully his, and in his struggle to keep it, he was made a monster and a legendary villain. Herod was a man of great barbarity toward all men equally and a slave to his passions. That was said by Josephus when he wrote his Antiquities of the Jews. Most people, when they hear of Herod the Great, remember him from the story in the Bible surrounding the birth of Jesus, regarding the slaughter of innocents. An evil and villainous act by itself, and one fitting for the kind of reputation that he built for himself over his life. And if that's the only thing you know about Herod the Great, you've probably heard enough and can deduce what kind of man, what kind of villain he was for the rest of his life. But for the purpose of history, storytelling, and lesson learning, I want to tell you some other things about Herod the Great. And believe me when I tell you, this is by no means exhaustive. Before we ever get to the infamous account found in Matthew's Gospel, we have to first establish the kind of man he was by going back to his very origins, specifically his upbringing. Herod was born around the year 70 BC. And he was not the first member of his family whose life would be ruled by the beast of politics. His father, Antipater, had been also. Antipater was a Roman-appointed governor over the Jewish people in Judea, and also an Edomite, someone who descended from the line of Esau, not Jacob, and therefore not a truly ethnically Jewish man. The Edomites had almost always been hated by the Jewish people, which, of course, didn't earn Herod's father any points among them. What made it worse, however, was that Antipater was a helper of the Romans, assisting them in their very conquest of Judea. So, make no mistake, Antipater was hated. But without getting too deep into his history, common threads in this family seem to revolve around gaining more influence, building their reputations for good reasons and bad, and manipulation, many other things. Herod, being the son of a politically detestable man, didn't do any favors for him growing up in his influential family. It would not be hard to imagine that Herod's mental state growing up in this environment of political manipulation and widespread hatred directed at his family from the Jewish people was impacted very much, and could have planted seeds in his heart that would grow into a wicked plant years later. This obviously would have made it very easy for him to harden himself against the Jewish people, and more than that, his fellow man in general. When you know that you're hated, born guilty by association, you generally go into one of two directions. Do everything you can to prove them wrong and foster goodwill, or lean into that mask they forced onto you. Herod, as we will see, made his choice. Now, although Herod would grow up not being ethnically Jewish, he was raised at least religiously Jewish. There is something to note here, though. Even if he was religiously Jewish, he rarely, if ever, spoke about it. It seems that being religiously Jewish was only for political convenience and the social points it would score for him. What didn't score him any points was that he became king of Judea in 37 BC by the appointment of the Roman Senate, and the Roman military was sent to help establish his rule in case there were any unwilling to submit to this tyranny. Here you have two problems. The first being Rome in general. The Jewish people were fiercely proud people, and they had an absolute hatred for Roman conquerors. Rome came in, subjugated them, imposed military oppression and taxation burdens on them that were seemingly unbearable. Now, second, the Jews believed that kings were supposed to come from the line of Judah in the tribes of Israel, based on texts like Genesis 49:10 and others. And Herod, being an Edomite, didn't come from that tribe. While their liberty was being stripped away and their kingdom given to a borderline Gentile, they would have seen it as just another thing that was being ripped from their hands. To the Jewish people, Herod was never truly their king. Herod, knowing this tension was alive and well, would try to appease the Jewish people on multiple occasions by overseeing massive building projects. Sometimes. It's clear when reading through the histories that he didn't just initiate and complete these projects for the Jewish people, but for his own glory and pride, and sometimes just to be antagonistic to the Jewish people. Now, these building projects would include the famous ones, the port that was at Caesarea. It was located off the Mediterranean coast of northern Israel. It created a boom in the economy due to trade and taxes. It was also a way for people to get from Egypt to Rome easier. Another famous one, the Herodium, which is located just south of Jerusalem. In that area, Herod's army fought with the Jewish people. At that place, Josephus says, quote, he afterward built a citadel in memory of the great actions he did there and adorned it with the most costly palaces, and erected very strong fortifications, and called it from his very own name, Herodium, end quote. Now this is another famous one, of course, Masada. It's one of the most well-known of Herod's fortresses, his palaces. And it was a focus of Josephus, who detailed its fall to the Romans in 73 AD. And of course, who could forget the crowning jewel, so to speak, of his ingenuity, the Jewish temple, described as, quote, Herod's most imposing achievements. There are more, of course, but these will serve for now to display the magnitude of his ingenuity, his pride, and antagonism, which actually gets us into a list of some of the evil things that this villain did. Since we talked about building projects, I have a question. Where did he get the money for all of those massive ventures? The people of Judea, through massive taxation, which equally, massively oppressed the people. And what did Herod get for this? Massive hatred, especially when their taxes went to unrighteous causes. Take, for example, his building of the second temple, a huge undertaking, and would have been received as absolutely positive if it weren't for a smack in the face that was tacked onto it. What do I mean? Well, Josephus records in the Antiquities, Book 17, "For Herod had caused such things to be made, which were contrary to the law, of which he was accused by Judas and Matthias. For the king had erected over the great gate of the temple a large golden eagle of great value, and had dedicated it to the temple. Now the law forbids that those who propose to live according to it, to erect images or representations of any living creature." End quote. So Herod not only committed idolatry in the temple by placing an eagle in it, it also symbolized Roman authority and Jewish subjugation, and also made the Jewish people pay for it. That's what villains do. I want to move now to more evil things that this villain did, things that will highlight a certain personality trait he possessed until the day of his death: paranoia. In 37 BC, when Herod became king, he had the last Hasmonean king, Antigonus II, beheaded, so there would be no chance of an overthrow. Now, we can agree that's evil, and in most cases that's politics, but hindsight is 2020. Looking back, when you know the rest of the story, this was most likely his paranoia, a paranoia that his family wouldn't even be immune to. Speaking of family matters, Herod had a very checkered and complicated family life. He had married 10 women and fathered 15 children by them. Of those wives, historical records imply that he had several of these women executed, and the rest simply discarded. It's not entirely clear, though, but what is clear is the treatment and execution of one of his wives. Her name was Mariamne I. Herod was married to a woman named Doris, his first wife, before he became king, whom he divorced to marry Mariamne. She was the granddaughter of 2 high priests, coming from a proud Jewish line. What probably didn't cause much pride was her marriage to Herod the Great in 37 BC, before he became king. It was merely a strategic marriage. When Herod was besieging Jerusalem, he saw the opportunity to marry Mariamne I, a Hasmonean princess, as a good way to soften the transfer of power, since, once again, he was not ethnically Jewish in blood. But she was. This marriage was simply convenient to Herod. He used her. So they married, and together they had 4 kids: Alexander, Aristobulus, Salampsio, and Cyprus. More on them in a moment. I mentioned that Mariamne I was a granddaughter of 2 high priests. Now, one of those was high priest in Jerusalem at the time, doing sacred work for God in his temple. Herod had him executed for suspicion of treason in 30 BC, just 7 years later from when he married Mariamne. Also that year, Herod would have his own brother-in-law, Costoborus, executed with no proof whatsoever, only because of his rising influence. Mariamne was now in the thick of the aura of a man beset by paranoia and someone who made a god out of his own power. As a sort of religious observance to his god, he would destroy anyone who threatened it. One can only guess as to how this made Mariamne feel. Her grandfather and brother now dead at the hands of her villainous husband. Although, tragically, her feelings on it wouldn't matter for much longer, because Herod had her executed for suspicion of treason just 1 year later in 29 BC. The body count for his God's sake was rising. Remember, I said that they had children together. The boys who watched their mother be executed most likely didn't favor their father too highly after this. His constant paranoia was becoming a problem for the family, for himself, in his political career, and anyone else around him. And this would continue to be a problem, as I said earlier, until the end of his life. A few years before his death in 7 BC, he would have 2 of those sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, strangled to death based on Herod's paranoia of them possibly plotting against him. One has to wonder how dark it must be in the heart of a person to kill their own children just to keep power. But that is what villains do. 4 BC rolls around, and with it, a tremendous downturn in the sanity of Herod and an increase in paranoia. This is probably because, according to records, his health takes a rapid decline in this year, leading to his tragic and terrifying death. He would be plagued by many pains affecting his body and his very mental state, which, one could argue, wasn't the most stable to begin with. While dealing with his painful ailments around 4 BC, give or take, scholars believe the horrible account of the slaughter of innocents takes place. It's only recorded in Matthew's Gospel, but displays for all to see the paranoia of this evil, disease-ridden villain. Upon hearing from the wise men of the promised king of the Jewish people, he fakes interest in worshiping this newborn king, only so that he can destroy him. A little baby, born in a manger, inheritor and God of the kingdoms of mankind, was now in the crosshairs of paranoia manifest. He waits for the return of the wise men, or some word from them, as to this new king's whereabouts. It never came. At this, Herod became furious, knowing he was tricked. So he sets out to commit a level of slaughter that has been remembered to this day. He sent out his soldiers to go into the land where the promised one was and commit to this act of horror. Here's what Matthew chapter 2 verse 16 says. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. When a normal human being looks into the eyes of a 2-year-old, they cannot imagine anything bad happening to them. They cannot imagine anyone doing anything to harm them. This feeling, of course, is only amplified when you have your own children. You have an enhanced drive to protect these little, precious humans. The same drive that can move mountains, it seems. Not just for your kids, but for any child. That's what a normal human being does. But as we know, Herod is not a normal human being, becoming twisted by his paranoia, devotion to the God of his power, and a willingness to dispatch anyone who threatens it. He has children, 2 years old and younger, butchered. That's what villains do. Estimates of how many are hard to ascertain. Judging by the region and the population of that time, scholars estimate anywhere between 10 and 50 children were killed. It's around this time that Caesar Augustus said in response to Herod killing his sons and the children in Syria, quote, "It's better to be Herod's pet pig than his son," end quote. And how true that was, because one of the last few things that Herod did before his death was have Antipater III, his oldest son through his first wife, Doris, executed for trying to kill him after finding out he would be the heir. Herod being riddled with disease, the horrific details we will dive into in a moment, tries to kill himself with a knife to end the painful suffering he was enduring, but he would be stopped. This prompted rumors that swirled around of his death, and an early celebration took place. His last act as king is reported as this: knowing he was unpopular and fear that people would celebrate rather than mourn his death, he ordered that prominent Jewish leaders and other distinguished men from across the land be arrested and confined in the Hippodrome, which is an arena in Jericho. Herod instructed that they should all be executed upon his death, ensuring that there would be widespread mourning in the land, even if it wasn't for him personally. That's what villains do. Thankfully, that order was never carried out, but the celebration definitely was. Josephus records, quote, "The nation rejoiced, supposing that now their miseries would be reduced to a more moderate degree," end quote. Now, about Herod's death, a few things are noted. First, from Josephus, and I do warn you, all of this can be a bit graphic. Quote, "But now Herod's distemper greatly increased upon him after a severe manner, and this by God's judgment upon him for his sins. For a fire glowed in him slowly, which did not so much appear to the touch outwardly, as it augmented his pains inwardly. For it brought upon him a vehement appetite to eating, which he could not avoid to supply with one sort of food or other. His entrails were also severely ulcerated, and the chief violence of his pain lay on his colon. An aqueous and transparent liquid also settled itself about his feet, and a like matter afflicted him at the bottom of his belly. Nay, farther, his privy member was putrefied and produced worms. And when he sat upright, he had a difficulty of breathing, which was very loathsome, on account of the stench of his breath and the quickness of its returns. He had also convulsions in all parts of his body, which increased his strength to an insufferable degree. It was said by those who pretend to divine, and who were endowed with wisdom to foretell such things, that God inflicted this punishment on the king on account of his great impiety." End quote. The descriptions are terrifying, and one cannot blame Josephus for attributing this ending for such an evil man to God's wrath and judgment. Now, many people, scholars, doctors, and more, have tried to use the information given through historical texts to deduce how this man died. ABC News wrote an article on this that is intriguing nonetheless. Quote, "He was a ruthless man who died a miserable death. More than 2,000 years after Herod the Great succumbed at age 69, doctors have now settled on an exact reason why the king of ancient Judea died: chronic kidney disease, complicated by a very uncomfortable case of maggot-infested gangrene of the genitals. Herod died in that state. Notice there was no 11th hour repentance, any observable concern for the state of his soul, or concern for the actions he took in his life. No, he had his God, his love for his power. Why switch religions now? He left behind a legacy of paranoia, tyranny, and legendary villainy. A villain that God would use not only as a display of his judgment and of his power to accomplish his plans by protecting the Messiah from him, but also as a way to show evil doesn't pay off. Villainy never succeeds, and your legacy will not be the one that you wanted. Herod the Great is remembered to this day not for his good, his leadership, his impact on the economy, or even his power as a king. Now, he's remembered for being a true, real-life villain. His story should be a warning to everyone, not just world leaders, but the everyday person. When God is not the center of your life, you will create your own God, and it will destroy you along with everything you work so hard for. including how your name will be remembered. Proverbs 10:7. The memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot.